Yeah, but I can hardly remember now. Find book in grandfather's bookcase one morning while I was staying at his home for the summer. Much older than the rest, leathery beat-up cover. It had no title, author, or distinguishing marks on the outside. Decided to flip through it. Read through the first page. By the time I had flipped to the second, I found I could no longer remember the contents of the first. I turned back and reread it, only to turn to page 2 again with the same results. Little weirded out, decide to just read and not care about the previous pages. On about the 7th page my grandfather came into the room and upon seeing the book in my hands, yelled at me to get out of his study and that he'd been looking for me all day and then snatched the book away. This shocked me at the time because my grandfather was a very quiet and soft-spoken man. He'd only yelled at me once before, years ago, and I was being a little cunt and deserved it. Anyways, I walk out to the kitchen and find that it's nearly 6 p.m. This really startles me, as I swear I was only in his study for no less than 15 minutes and I went in right around 8 to 9 a.m. I can no longer remember any contents of the book and my grandfather has since hidden it.
Working at a convenience store. A few miles from the city limits. Near the highway. But still pretty urban. You get the idea. Graveyard shift. 2 a.m. Only the crazies come out this late. After not getting any customers for my whole shift. A beat-up minivan rolls into the parking lot. Out steps. And I shit you not. The biggest drag queen I have ever seen. Dude slash it has to be at least 6'6". Maybe taller but scrawny as a scarecrow. Looking at him walk unnerving itself, but then he comes in. This guy was not fooling anyone. He made Caitlyn Jenner pass for cover girl. Too much makeup that looked clownish, dress that was too tight. Feet the size of dinner plates crammed into sandals and a bugle that was practically doing the Wilhelm scream in his pants. This Stephen King creation is lumbering around. Hunched over pawing through stuff but his way to obviously looking me up and down. We got a .357 revolver and a blackjack under the counter, but airplanes were needed to take down Kong. He lumbers out back to his minivan and talks to somebody in the driver's seat. Then daddy long legs his way back in. Starts buying random things that have no relation to each other. A toolbox. A jug of water. A radio. All heavy stuff he's clearly struggling with. Pays for it all. Asks if he could get some help bringing it out to the van. Say no. I can't leave the counter. Aw come on. Please. It just take a minute nope. Well the service here is just shit. I'd like to speak to somebody in charge. Call the store number. I don't give a fuck. Watch him struggle with all the heavy shit. And walk out into the night. Soon after I hear the van pull out and see its lights out the store window. 10 minutes of silence. When I hear a tapping on the window which is adjacent to the counter. It's the same guy. Peering in and smiling like the fucking Joker. Literally fall out of my chair. Oh sweetheart, I didn't mean to scare you. But my friend just left for an emergency and I had to stay here. Could you come out so I feel safer? Grab the blackjack. Tell him to get the fuck out of here or I'm going to run him over with my car. His face gets super close to the window. I see him breathing on it. It's like a transvestite Jurassic Park. He gives me the very definition of a death stare for a solid 15 seconds. Then in a very masculine clear tone, says "Yeah, we're gonna die tonight." Punches the window and walks away. Spend the rest of the night drowning in coffee and chain smoking cigarettes. Looking over my should with a gun and blackjack near me until dawn. Dawn comes, I go out to my car. All the shit he bought is in a pile to the side of the store. Like he never needed it and discarded it. Tell my friend who works at a Dunkin' Donuts a mile up the road about it. He worked that night too by pure coincidence. Says around that same time a minivan came in his parking lot. Parked. Waited for a half hour without the driver getting out of the car and then headed back in the direction it came from.
I live in this shitty little one-bedroom apartment. I have 2 cats, so my blinds are fucked up beyond repair. I'm going to have to buy a new set for every window and door in the place. I'm a poor fag, so I don't actually own a bed, and my roommate sleeps on the only couch. My makeshift bed is right below the 2 windows in the bedroom, and they're always smudged, even after I clean them, inside and out. They face the highway outside, and I am conveniently placed close enough to a streetlight to receive its eerie burnt orange lighting, but not close enough for it to function as a valid light source. I sit up late at night on my computer, leaning against the wall just beside the aforementioned windows, doing whatever, and every so often, I have the strangest feeling that if I turn my head ever so slightly, I will see something looking in my window at me. My imagination loves to run wild with me, sending me into near panic attacks, irrational as they all are, ending only when I can assure myself that my window is, in fact, devoid of anything unusual. You can imagine my surprise when one night, I turned my head just a tiny fraction, to catch a glimpse of my window out of the corner of my eye, and saw it. Contorted features, hideously amused expression, wrinkled skin and wide sunken eyes that reflected no light at all. It was hard to see the features in detail, since it was just out of clear sight, and I sat there for a moment, unsure if I should turn my head further to confirm this apparition, and then I blinked, and it was gone. I'm still not sure if I truly did see the thing, or if it was just a product of late-night paranoia and junk food. But I'm less inclined to look out my window at night now, just in case it's there again, and catches me looking. I get the feeling that it wouldn't like that at all.
Hey X, this literally just happened. Not in any way paranormal, but still brick shitting to me. Live in quintessential sitcom-esque suburban neighborhood. Cloudy, foggy, wet evening when sun is still up, but is about to set. Warm enough to leave the window to my house open. I am watching random shit on TV. At some point, hear weird as fuck hissing sound coming from outside. Slight nope, continue watching TV. About 30 seconds later hear it again, closer and more clearly. Seems to be coming right out of the sky. Elevated nope, but gather the fortitude to go outside and look around. Inspect area around front yard, but don't see anything. Hear hissing a third time. Look behind house. Giant fucking red leering face floating in the sky in the woods behind my house. Has huge neatly arranged teeth forming a wicked smile and slanted eyes, overall resembling some tribal demon mask. Somehow illuminated from within, and then suddenly goes dark. Left with dark roundish thing bigger than a house floating in the sky. At this point my legs are trembling from the shock, and I can barely stand. After about 10 seconds of utter disbelief it hits me that what I'm looking at is just a low-flying hot air balloon. MFW, some asshole and fiendishly detailed a hot air balloon is taking the time to fly barely 300 feet up just to fuck with people who may happen to spot him. The hissing sound I was hearing was just a faggot using his gas burner, which also illuminates the balloon from within. Promptly overcome with the urge to cuss the asshole out, but decide instead to call the cops on him. I was pretty sure flying that low was illegal as shit. After I called them, I never hear of anything about this again, and the balloon cleared the neighborhood completely. Pace around my yard a bit, and then go back inside. This just happened barely an hour ago. If they catch this guy and report about it in the local news, I will update you guys. I still can't believe I fucking fell for this shit.
I grew up in northern Sweden around Kiruna. Mother is a Sami, so there was a lot of pagan influence that was a part of my life and still is. I've moved down south from Kiruna since, but the story stems from when I was around 20 years old. Little brother of 16 years tells me him and his friends found a dead animal in a frozen lake. Naturally, this isn't too uncommon. Sometimes foxes do fall into or traverse the lake. It gets hypothermia and the lake freezes around it, encasing it in ice. Retard and co. wants me to come over with a saw, some chisels and a hammer, because they want to take it out of the ice for bragging tights. Halfway there my little brother calls me and tells me to come pick them up. Yeah sure, but what about the fox? Something took the fox. By the time I get there, I go have a look at where the fox supposedly had been. There were some cracks on the top of the ice, but it hadn't been broken. But you could tell that there was a hollow space where the fox was meant to be. My guess is that something from below the ice had snatched it. Had me fucked up.
Be a kid living in Western Canada, make friends with a kid named Ryan. We would hang out for days on end and have sleepovers at his house. Only rule was we couldn't go upstairs, so we hung out in the basement playing SNES and NES games. One day he invites me to go camping with him and his father. Spend the days doing cool shit like riding his little 50cc dirt bike, swimming in the lake, throwing stones at squirrels. One night his dad starts to get drunk. He was always a pretty nice guy, but rough around the edges. Starts talking nonsense about his brother being in the woods. Gets even more drunk. Now he's getting violent and unpredictable. builds a huge fire to illuminate the woods around us. He's convinced that there's someone out there fucking with us. Tells us to go into the tent and go to sleep. We lay there listening to him losing his goddamn mind to whatever he thinks is out there. Fire is getting bigger. Suddenly hear banging. Ryan always had a stash of small Chinese firecrackers. It could have been those, but I couldn't tell. He proceeds to continue this insane shit all night. Eventually we fall asleep. Wake up. His dad is in a hurry to leave. Now apparently sober. We ride in the camper talking about how much fun we had and don't mention the last night. Get back to town. His dad sends me home. Ask Ryan if he wants to hang out. He says we can't anymore because his dad said so. Convince him to come play elsewhere so his dad wouldn't know. His dad finds us. Violently grabs Ryan and leaves, cursing at me. The next day Ryan isn't at school. Find out that they had suddenly moved away. I'm not sure what the fuck happened that night, but Ryan was a true bro.
So, has anyone thought about how Portal is a giant allusion to purgatory? There is, seemingly, no reason to be putting Chell through these horrible experiments, is for GLaDOS' sadistic pleasure. But what if it's really a test? Not a scientific test, but a test of character and determination, as to redeem oneself. Perhaps GLaDOS' taunts of all your other friends couldn't come either, because you don't have any other friends, because of how unlikable you are. It says so right here in your personnel file. Unlikable. Liked by no one. A bitter unlikable loner whose passing shall not be mourned. It also says you were adopted. So that's funny too. Isn't just pointless mocking, but a reminder of Chell's former life. It's also heavily implied that GLaDOS could possibly be a much more knowing being as some kind of tester for purgatory. Quotes like, speaking of curiosity, you're curious about what happens after you die, right? Guess what? I know. Quotes like this have a much more significant meaning when thought of in this context. I feel sorry for you, really. Because you're not even in the right place. This is your fault. It didn't have to be like this. You're not a good person, you know that, right? Good people don't end up here.
I love the snow. I love how all life seems to be buried, while still letting their ghost-like images show from beneath a cold blanket. I love it when everything is buried under a layer of soft, white powder that kills the plants beneath it. I love watching the snow fall languidly, slowly, forever freezing the animals, to never wake up from their comfortable sleep. To watch it lazily float down from the sky in the fading light is simply magical. It's wonderful to see all life just seems to stop, just to make an undisturbed coat of small ice crystals. But even better, and this is my favorite part, is that anything that does still move shows me everything about them. They leave behind distinct tracks in the white snow, showing if they move on 2 legs or 4, if they're with anybody, how big or heavy they are, what sort of stride they're moving in, how long ago they passed by, etc., etc. I like to follow sometimes, because the only animals that can move around in this weather are warm-blooded. There's something very fulfilling about warmth in the cold, like drinking hot cocoa, there's just something intrinsically delicious about it. And even though the warm blood might melt some of the snow, it will still stain some of the white and ice, brilliant red. It looks so stark. Simply breathtaking. The best part is, the snow makes things so quiet. It absorbs sound, you see. So I can follow you, by stepping in your tracks, and you wouldn't notice a thing until I'm right on you. Isn't that neat? It's even easier if the wind's blowing. I love the snow.
Be driving home from a late shift at work. Moon is out, still a very dark night. Live roughly 30 miles outside of town with my cousin. Driving along the interstate for some of the trip. Take my Tom and start the last part of the drive. 12 miles of dirt road that leads back into the woods, only have 2 neighbors who live right next to the road I am on. No one for 12 miles. I am about halfway home when I come around a bend, going maybe 35, and I see some bright object crossing the road. Swerve just enough to avoid hitting it. Have no idea what it is. Was very small. Replay making that turn and seeing the object a couple of times in my head, get curious and turn around. Come around the corner and see the object resting on the opposite side of the road totally. It's a toy. I get out and approach the toy. The forest is totally dark and totally quiet. Still about 5 miles from home. 7 miles from the main road and nearest neighbor. It is a plastic toy train, just the engine portion of a train. I play with the wheels and wonder how it got out here. Turn the toy over and see a dial. Give it a twist. It's a wind-up toy. Remember that this was rolling across the street. I drop the toy and begin to walk backwards to my car, too scared to turn around. Ass bumps into the door. The door rocks, bumps into something and then settles. Something is blocking the door. Before I can turn around to investigate, hear something year off down the road, plodding like it's on all fours, turn and see nothing. Get in my car and haul ass home. Never saw that toy again. My cousin believes me cause he sees weird shit.
The asleep. Dreaming about talking to a guy with no face out my window. I can see his features move under his skin, turns out he has a face and it's covered in skin. Wake up sitting up in bed, the exact same position I was dreaming about, talking in, gesturing with my hands, facing the window, and smiling. I was in the middle of a sentence. What the fuck was I talking to? Nope, all the way down the steps and watch Family Guy until morning. I can still see his toothy grin form underneath his flesh. I live on the second story.
B9. Playing in front yard while big brother is inside sleeping. Waiting for dad to come home. Truck pulls up, window rolls down. 40-ish looking guy inside smiles at me. Hey Anon, how are you? He called me by my name. I ask him how he knows my name. I'm a friend of your dad's, he asked me to watch you. Ask him if he's a policeman too. He looks at me wide-eyed for a second, then asks me if my dad is a cop. Say yeah, tell him me and my brother are waiting for him. Guy speeds off. Dad comes home 20 minutes later. Tell him what happened. Describe the guy in his truck. Has me ride around with him looking for the guy. No luck. Come home and dad yells at my brother for not watching me. Ends up adopting a German Shepherd. Never caught the guy.
I suck at writing these, but I guess can try. Be me 78-year-old. Live in a small town that used to be thriving with trains and stuff. My grandpa was a mechanic. He fixed both the trams and rails. My family says I act a lot like my grandpa. The same tastes, posture, gestures, etc. I couldn't have teamed this from him. He died when I was 2, and by that time he had Alzheimer. I sometimes had strange memories when I visited the train station and found stuff or looked at the rails in certain angles. Somehow knew the code of the train tracks and routes. I remember that I somehow was familiar with trains loading people. People were dressed in the proper attire and such. One time I found a strange piece. I have a sudden vision of people screaming and a train derailing, then more screams, but these were joyful. Another time I found a bullet casing and I remember screaming and gunshots. I stopped trying to remember stuff like that. In current day I can't replicate it. A few years ago I discovered that many years ago, a train loaded with gold bars derailed and dropped its cargo and people in it. Everyone rushed to grab the gold and take it home. Soon after, federal soldiers were dispatched to my town. They weren't playing around, they started shooting anyone that got close to the train wreck. And there are more stories related to that train station, albeit more short and simple.
I've had some bad ones. Wake up in the middle of the night. Can't move. There's a conversation going on in my room. Too scared to open eyes. Voices are talking about ghosts. I'm still scared but beginning to drift back to sleep. Suddenly I hear, what about you, Anon? Do you believe in ghosts? Why don't you open your eyes and find out? At this point I'm shitting myself with fear. Voices start to giggle softly as I lose consciousness. I think I got no scared that I fainted while I was paralyzed. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, but it was the first time I had hallucinations. I was young too and didn't understand what was happening. It was horrible.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.